An illusion has 3 stages. First, there is the setup, in which the nature of what might be attempted at is hinted at, or suggested, or explained. The apparatus is seen. Volunteers from the audience sometimes participate in preparation. As the trick is being set up, the magician will make use of every possible use of misdirection. The performance is where the magician's lifetime of practice and his innate skill as a performer co-join to produce the magical display. The third stage is sometimes called the effect or the prestige, and this is the product of magic. If a rabbit is pulled from a hat, the rabbit, which apparently did not exist before the trick was performed, can be said to be the prestige of that trick. The Prestige by Christopher Priest, 1995. Famously adapted by Christopher Nolan, 2006. Right off the top here, I want to say that whether you've seen the film or not, you need to read this book. Why? Well, let's start with the wonderful introduction by Graham Sleight to the SF Masterworks edition. The idea that magic costs is at least as old as the story of Faust. In writing The Prestige, Christopher Priest took this idea and enriched it with many more things. The iconic gaslit world of Victorian Edwardian England, a deep engagement with the art of stage magic, and its own abiding questions about how much the tellers of stories should be trusted. Earlier Priest novels such as The Affirmation, 1981, or The Glamour, 1984, have unreliable narrators who lead you into dizzying labyrinths where nothing is certain, not even the eye who is telling you the story. In The Prestige, Priest found a subject that both fitted these preoccupations and turned outwards to a wider felt world. The Prestige is probably Priest's most famous novel, having been filmed memorably by Christopher Nolan in 2006. Anyone who reads the novel after seeing the film will find much that's familiar and some things that aren't. The novel starts in contemporary England, unlike the movie, which stays entirely in the period setting. The contemporary narrator, Andrew Westley, says early on that for as long as he can remember, I have had the feeling that someone else is sharing my life. It's this search for an apparent double or twin that sets off the action of the novel. Through this frame, the central narratives of 2 rival stage magicians are uncovered. Each of them, Alfred Borden and Rupert Angier, tells their story in turn. Significantly, in a novel filled with proliferating doubles and twins, each ends their story with the same words. Each has a seemingly impossible illusion at the heart of their stage act, and their narratives are in part an accounting, a setting out of the costs exacted as a result. These are the setup, the performance itself, and the effect, or prestige. This last stage, the rabbit pulled out of the hat or the miraculous transported man, is not an abstract idea, but a literal thing. The rabbit, or the transported man, is the prestige. But doubled meanings proliferate around this word as the story goes on. The fantastic is, in general, the field that makes abstract ideas, death say, literal. Here, Priest takes the idea of a literal prestige and places it at the heart of his story. It's suggestive that the main narrative is set at the turn of the 20th century, a century that also ended up filled with Faustian bargains with science. When scientific advancement enters the story, in the person of inventor Nikola Tesla, he brings with him our knowledge of everything else that was to follow. In this sense, historical narratives like Borden's or Angier's are always exercises in irony. As readers, we know what's to follow and how much their lives and deeds will turn out to matter. Tesla clearly knows the danger of the knowledge he brings, unlike those who end up using it. Angier's decisions and Borden's end up being so tainted by their obsessive rivalry that everything else fades into the background for them. This is made clear when one considers the gap between their public and private selves. They both keep the costs of their bargains as secret as possible, and these secrets in the end become prisons for them. All this is to pass over, however, Priest's sheer skill in telling the tale. The gradual release of information is beautifully timed, Borden's narrative and the strange pact that governs it is particularly enthralling, a code that can only be cracked in retrospect. Priest is also unshowily skillful in bringing to life this world of the past, and the place stage magic occupied in it. Borden's and Angier's desire to succeed in this world seems natural and inevitable. It's also striking how much of a difference is made by the class backgrounds of the two magicians. Borden's upwardly mobile anxieties versus Angier's aristocratic assurance. Angier's heritage comes to the fore in the novel's final contemporary section, again not part of the movie. This both answers many of the questions raised so far and raises new ones. The novel closes on a stunning image that seems both inevitable and surprising. Like Faust, both Borden and Angier have made pacts to gain their power. As the Prestige finally makes clear, the costs are paid beyond even their deaths. Graham Slight, 2010. The novel is broken into 5 parts, each focusing on a character of the story. Part 1 is the contemporary story of Andrew Wesley. Part 2 goes back 100 years to Alfred Borden. He is one of the magicians. He says in the beginning, my real name is Alfred Borden. The story of my life is the story of the secrets by which I have lived my life. They are described in this narrative for the first and last time. This is the only copy. Part 3 is back in the contemporary with Kate Angier. Then we go back to the late 1890s into the early 1900s with Rupert Angier. Rupert's account is the longest account in the novel. Then we conclude in the contemporary time with the Prestiges. In Part 2, Alfred Borden gives us his account of his rivalry with fellow magician Rupert Angier, or known by his stage name of the Great Danton. Borden develops a trick called the Transported Man, or later on, the New Transported Man. This trick becomes central to the novel and their rivalry. In Part 4, Rupert Angier gives his account of this rivalry. He also tells us the depths he will go to replicate the Transported Man. There are references to historical characters in this novel, to magicians, and to one scientist, Nikola Tesla. Tesla appears within the novel. So you can see that the structure of this novel, this bouncing around from the contemporary to the turn of the 20th century, is quite different than the movie. The journals or diaries of Borden and Angiers plays a big part in the movie, but they are different than what was written in the novel. Christopher Nolan and Jonathan Nolan wrote a script that took 5 years to adapt the novel. It's difficult to take all these concepts, a 360-page novel, and put it into a 2-hour screenplay. Perhaps, if someone like Mike Flanagan wanted to make a 10-episode TV series, that would work. So the Nolan brothers just take the middle of the novel, the 2 accounts in the diaries, and they weave it into a story that is the same yet different. Some of the components are clearly the Nolans. There also seems to be a cruelty or a harshness in the film that is a step up from what is in the novel. It certainly is more violent, and the movie comes to a bit of a different conclusion regarding the Prestige. Regarding the movie, I found a very interesting quote in an interview with Christopher Priest. An interview with Christopher Priest from September 7th, 2011, from sffworld.com. The question, in some ways, the film of The Prestige is quite different to the book. How do you feel as a writer about film directors altering your work? They do their job and I do mine. I deliberately did not involve myself with the adaptation of The Prestige because I was interested to see what Christopher Nolan would do with it. At the time, I thought he was a serious and interesting talent. He's gone downhill a bit since those days. Too many Batman films and all that. Also, I wanted to see what Hollywood would do with something I thought was highly unlikely as a Hollywood project. With hindsight, I wish I had known what Nolan was going to do with the ending. He takes a huge chance with it, and would have said a few things to him about that. But on the whole, I feel it is his film, just as the novel is mine. The only thing that seriously irritated me was Nolan's attitude that the book hadn't existed before he came along and made the film. In fact, it had been in print for 12 years and was in translations around the world. In several interviews, he urged people not to read the book as it ruined his film. You don't feel warm to someone like that. So if you haven't seen the movie or read the novel, I would suggest reading the novel first. And if you have seen the movie, I'm telling you, the novel is better. This is the second novel that I've read by Christopher Priest. You'll find a review for The Inverted World on my channel, and I'll put a link in the description for this video. The Prestige is a well-written, intricately plotted novel. It in itself is the prestige. I give this masterful novel 10 out of 10. Highly, highly recommended. So have you read The Prestige? What are your thoughts on the novel, or perhaps the movie? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, keep reading.